Welcome to today's Inspired Talk, Redefining Retirement, How to Thrive in the New Era of Longevity. Hi, I'm Seth Streeter, Chief Impact Officer here at Mission Wealth, and for 25 years, we've been helping thousands of clients feel financially secure with their retirement goals. And while the foundation of these conversations has really been around optimizing finances, we also advocate for optimizing the lives of our clients across a broader definition of wealth. Many of you have probably seen our wealth wheel where we talk about wealth across 12 dimensions. So it's not just do we have enough income to cover our expenses and enough assets to feel comfortable. It's also the quality of our relationships. Do we feel like we're making an impact in the community or the world at large? Our physical health. And we're excited to keep being an advocate to help clients live fulfilled lives across all of these definitions. And today, I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, Simon Chan, and we're going to talk about these longevity trends and how this really mandates us to have a holistic lens. And Simon is the person for us to speak to. He is the founder and CEO of Adapt with Intent, which is a consulting firm that helps leaders and organizations redesign work across life stages with a focus on living and thriving in an area of longer lifespans. He's one of 15 global ambassadors at the Stanford Center on Longevity, and he leverages their new map of life research to help organizations modernize societal pillars such as financial services, higher education, and the workplace to support 100+ year lives. He also serves on the advisory board of the Yale School of Management, where he's working on the design of the Experienced Leaders Initiative that's kicking off in January 2025. And this program will help leaders transition from their primary careers to their next chapter. With over 25 years of executive leadership experience, and he spanned financial services, technology, and innovation, Simon has deep insights into strategic planning and personal growth. He's also a certified financial planner and certified professional retirement coach. So Simon, we really appreciate you being here. And the way we're going to kick off today is we're going to start with Simon giving us an overview of some trends for about the first 7-8 minutes. And then we'll be going into some interactive questions. And we're going to ask you all to be engaged and to participate. We're going to be having some chat prompts and some polls. And of course, we want your questions. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. And we're going to record this and provide everyone with a summary of top takeaways from today's conversation. So I'm excited. Let's buckle up. And together we can help expand our perspective of retirement. So Simon, I'll pass it to you to give us an overview of these current trends.
Thanks a lot, Seth, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So I'm going to start off a little bit with just some of the trends that we see around longevity and get us started to bring in that big picture. So I'm just going to bring up my slides here. I'm going to spend about 7 to 10 minutes just talking about these things, just to ground us, to get us a sense of what's happening in the longevity space. So the first thing to note is that people are living a lot longer, and it's kind of an interesting fact that people at the turn of the century lived for an average of 45, 50 years. Today, fast forward to the US, we look at our life expectancy is really closer to 80. So for most of human history, most people have lived a life expectancy of probably 18 to 20 years old because we didn't have advances like we do today around things like clean water, sanitation, and health. And that's really what's projected and propelled this longer lives. So we've been given an extra 30 years of life expectancy in a single century. And so it really has happened very quickly. It doesn't feel quick, but it happens very quickly. And so today we'll talk a little bit about is how this change in longevity has happened so quickly that we haven't really adapted how we live some of our lives to accommodate this extra 30 years. The other thing that's happening is that birth rates have declined both globally as well in the US, going from 3.1 in 1960 to less than replacement rate in 2023. And what that means is declining birth rates means smaller families, and families are starting later. So when you look at longer lives, declining birth rates, what you have is a real reshape of our society. So you've often heard a lot about how society is aging, which is true. We are aging, and you hear about the silver economy, the graying society, et cetera. But I think the most interesting thing to think about is not necessarily the fact that we're aging, is that we're actually living in the most age-diverse society in human history. if you think about the turn of the century when we had a lot of young people and very few old people, to today, with again longer lives, declining birth rates, we have the same number of people at almost every same age band. So we've gone from demographic pyramids to demographic squares. And so what I'd get you to think about is society built for a period of time where we have a lot of young people and very few older people, or is it actually built for the age diversity that we have today? And I would suggest that society is not built for the age diversity we have today and was built for much shorter lives. So oftentimes we talk about big trends like globalization, AI, et cetera. I would suggest that longevity and this shifting demographic is as impactful on society as those other trends, but often doesn't get a lot of play. And so society is being impacted in a multiple different ways. It impacts individuals. People are living now much more nonlinear lives, multi-stage lives, which we'll get into. Organizations now need to deal with an aging workforce, 5 generations in the workforce. And there's not a lot of structures to deal with many of these things. From a customer standpoint, the aging customer base presents a huge opportunity. AARP said that over 50 crowd actually contributes $45 trillion to global GDP. So that's like 34%. And so how are we adapting how we're dealing with customers as organizations, as well as our workforces as we look at this new demographic? And then obviously governments, we think about healthcare implications, pension, social security, workforce and labor policies, as well as the need as people live a lot longer for lifelong learning and reskilling. So as Seth mentioned, I'm one of the ambassadors for the Stanford Center on Longevity, and we have the opportunity to talk to a lot of the experts there. And one of the things that I think was really important when we heard from the director at the Center of Longevity, Laura Karstensen, was the naming of the center was very intentional. It wasn't the center for longevity. It was the center on longevity. And what I mean by that is for longevity, a lot of times when we hear the word longevity, we think about life extension. We think about longer lives and just a singular focus on health. And so the distinction is on longevity is about the fact that we actually are living longer. So it's not about life extension. It's about how do we actually increase the quality of life for these century-long lives and make sure that we've built the structures to help people navigate this longer life with a sense of belonging, purpose, and that it's inclusive for all stages. I was just actually on a call this morning with the UN Global Institute on Aging, and they're thinking about now adding longevity into their name because, again, the connotation of aging has this connotation of just for older adults and just about life extension and not about this broader notion of longevity, quality of life, and ensuring that we make use of the additional time that we've been given. So when we think about longer lives, really the big shift is around this idea of a longevity bonus or dividend. So we've been gifted an extra 30 years of life in the last century. And for the most part, what we've done is we've just added it on to the end of our lives, added it to retirement. So if I were to ask you probably at the beginning of your life, if someone was to give you an extra 30 years of longevity in your life, would you just tack it on to the end or would you actually redistribute it throughout your life? And so that's what people are starting to do, and that's how things are changing. We're moving away from this idea of a linear 3-step life where everybody goes to learn, work, and retire at the same time, their hard stops, versus a much more nonlinear fluid journey where there's multiple transitions. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, but things like gap years, part-time work, et cetera, are things that are evolving. And this idea of maybe a bit of more of a portfolio life or a period of reinvention in retirement. I think it's really important for us to realize that retirement is a man-made structure. It's not something that always existed. And so I think retirement itself is evolving. And so maybe just a bit of history on retirement to set the stage. Prior to the 20th century, early 20th century, there was no retirement. That just didn't exist. People worked until they couldn't work anymore, and people were taken care of by their families. And I think it's important to note that life expectancy was in their 40s at that time. It wasn't until probably about 1935 or the mid 20th century where we introduced the idea of Social Security. Employer provided pension plans emerged. And then we established this age of a retirement age of 65. That became a social expectation. But again, remember, life expectancy at that period of time was in your 50s and 60s. So again, it wasn't designed for a long period of time. The third stage is this idea of a golden era of retirement, or the golden years. And this was popularized by TV commercials, things like Sun City, which was a retirement facility in Arizona. But this was post 1950, the post-war boom. Retirement was seen as a reward for a long career. It was the destination. And so we had defined benefit plans, the expansion of Social Security to support this financial vision, and life expectancy started to creep up into the 70s. And so I would argue that's largely where our financial institutions, our social narrative is stuck. It's stuck in this golden era. And I would suggest that we're in a period of time where we're migrating to a fourth version of retirement, which is a bit of an era where retirement's being reimagined. With the decline of traditional pension plans, more self-managed accounts like 401k, people are starting to think about this period as a period of purpose, lifelong learning, and the notion of maybe encore careers or volunteerism. And so it's not just being framed as an era of rest and relaxation. So if we think about retirement as less of a journey and more as of a transition into stages, many of you today probably are in the anticipation phase. Some of you may already be in this retirement phase and you're exploring what's happening. But we talk a lot about this period of liberation, right? Travel, golf, spending time with the grandkids, which is great. But we often don't talk about the period of disorientation where people struggle through this transition. The other thing that's new in this journey is this period of potential reinvention or continued growth. People are looking to stay engaged. You may have 15 or 20 years of healthy engagement that you can stay engaged in and discover new things. But to unlock that, it's important to think about how we might take a different mindset to experiment, explore new things, which we'll talk about. And what I would say is largely this journey today is a DIY or do-it-yourself process. There's not a lot of guidance there, and I think that's a real opportunity for us to discuss today and in the future. How do we build systems to put them into place to help people navigate this transition? Because people didn't live long enough in the past to necessitate these types of structures. I think it's important for us to think about what our mindset is about aging. How do we think about aging? Do we think about it as something that's positive? Or do we think about just the physical aspects of aging? And I think if you start, I'd encourage you to start looking at social culture and pop culture to look at how aging's changed. In the 1980s, most of you will recognize the Golden Girls. This is how aging was portrayed in the 1980s. Fast forward to the 2010s, Sex and the City had their sequel. You can see at the bottom. It's really interesting to see that people both in the Golden Girls and Sex and the City, they were actually the exact same age. They were in their late 40s and early 50s, and the difference in how they're being portrayed. So why now? Why is it important for us to talk about longevity, talk about reframing retirement today? Well, we're at a bit of a tipping point, particularly in the US. I'm Canadian, so we're a little bit further ahead. But by 2050, 1 in 5 people will be over the age of 65. And in 2050, we're going to have more people over 60 than under the age of 18. So the US has a lot of time has some time now to actually think about how do we modernize our societal norms, our discussions, and put in some structures. Because if you look at other countries for inspiration, this has happened in other countries like Japan, Germany, and Italy. And so I think it's a real opportunity for us to start this conversation about how do we think about this a little bit differently. Kind of just to close, I love this quote by Carl Jung, who's a psychiatrist, a very famous psychiatrist and pioneering evolutionary theorist. And he talks about the fact that we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at the evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening become a lie. And this is really the idea of migrating and thinking about our stages differently and how our mindsets will evolve. Oftentimes early in our career, we think about success, and a lot of times later in life, we think about more about significance and about emotional well-being and relationships and purpose and impact being more central to how we think about things. So I think I'll leave it at that, but hopefully that sets the stage for us to have a great conversation today, to give you a bit of a sense of what's happening in the longevity space, how retirement's changing, and just how the life course is changing. So Seth,
Thank you so much, Simon.
That's the stage.
Yeah. That was a great kind of setting the stage for us. And I'd love to have everyone answer in the chat. Make sure you reply to all. We put in a prompt, which is, what gets better with age? When you think about your mindset around aging, what for you is getting better with age? David Price said, knowledge and experience gets better with age. True. We have more wisdom. Jonathan Ainsley just getting better with age, period. We
I
have
love it.
patience. Yes.
Wisdom, absolutely.
I think we care less about what people think of us as we get older.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Perspective is a great one, Paul, right? We broaden our horizons. We're able to take a step back oftentimes and think a little bit more broadly.
Empathy, deeper, more aligned relationships. Agency. I like that, John. We have agency, yeah, to make things happen in our life. A whole view, level of knowledge, self-awareness.
Yeah. I think about just self-regulation, right? I think about, when I was younger, I didn't know how to really regulate my emotions. I still have a lot of work to do, but very different today.
Yep. And we do have more resources, which includes time resources. And we have resiliency and culinary skills, Andrew. I love it. We can cook a little bit better.
Yeah, that's a skill I've had to build over time, that's for sure. Still not great at it.
Yeah, grit. Well, thank you all for sharing that. We'll be having some more prompts here, and feel free to continue to put those in the chat. But Simon, I'd love to kind of kick off as we think about those trends. We are seeing people live longer. We're seeing them live healthier, so their health span has improved as well as their lifespan. How does this change the way that we need to think about life stages?
Yeah, I think the life stages part, I think the big thing for us to embrace is the fact that it's not a linear path anymore, right? I think if you look back to some of our, how our parents grew up, a lot of people followed the same path, very similar way of living. We didn't have global travel, we didn't have social media, so you kind of were seeing what was right in front of you. And so people generally followed that three-stage life I was talking about. They learned at the very beginning. They worked a lot of times at the same company or at least in the same sector in the same industry for a period of time, and then they full stop retired. And I think what's changed is the fact that it's not just longevity; it's all those other factors as well: globalization, technology. People see a much broader set of options and pathways, and as you get older, those pathways start to diverge. And I think there's an opportunity for people to navigate in and out of different lives. And so when you think specifically about longevity, I think more and more people are realizing, you know what, maybe it doesn't make sense for me to wait until I'm retired to do some of these things. Maybe I can actually take time, throughout my life and actually redistribute some of those years of longevity throughout my life. From a personal perspective, just an example, for myself, in my early 40s, I took a bit of a sabbatical for about 6 months, and I just traveled, not exclusively, but I traveled with my parents and my son and my wife because my son was in grade 8. He was heading into high school. My parents were in their late 70s, getting a little bit older, and I spent a lot of time talking to retirees who had kind of waited until they were retired to spend some of those years. And often what they said to me was, my parents aren't around anymore, or my kids are in their 20s and 30s, and while they love me, they're just not available to be able to travel. And so I think we're going to see a bit more of the fluidity in terms of how people travel this life course and more diversity, that's for sure.
Right. And with these demographic shifts in mind, like what societal changes do you think are most urgent to better support longer lives as far as societal shifts?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is I think our workforce structures need to change. Today, I think most people still in the workplace, it's a full stop retirement, right? So, you get to a certain age, if you have a defined benefit plan, it's a certain age that at 60 or 65, you're going to retire, but it generally still is a set retirement. I think from a workforce perspective, most workplaces, one of the number one things that CEOs talk about is a lack of skilled labor or a lack of talent. And to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you have probably 20 to 25% of your workforce over the next 10 years are going to be retiring, that you don't have options for them to stay engaged. So again, I know I'm using, a lot of times I talk to retirees and I say work, it's a 4-letter word, but I think we need to reframe how we think about work. Work actually provides a lot of benefits to us personally, sense of purpose, connection and meaning, et cetera. And so I think there needs to be more flexible options from a workplace perspective where it's a win-win for both the person who's considering their next chapter, as well as the workplace. So I think workplace structures is one. The second one I think is just more support for life transitions. I think more and more people are doing are shifting. And again, it's not just retirement. This is earlier in your career. People may want to take a gap year. People may want to go part-time because they've got younger children, et cetera. A lot of these structures are not in place. And so there's not these natural off ramps and on ramps for these transitions. Stanford Center on Longevity has a nice little tagline. They say transitions are a feature, not a bug anymore in your lifetime. And I think that's very apropos and true. So I think we need to build more structures to support these life transitions. And I think we actually need to really normalize the fact that people are going to be moving in and out of different forms of work, leisure, et cetera, versus boxing us into these three stages that we've talked about.
Right. And as far as three stages, there's the learn, earn, and return framing. And I think oftentimes people have sensed that return, giving back, is in the form of volunteerism, which is wonderful, being on boards and so forth. But work can be a way of returning, right? Returning that wisdom and applying that wisdom. We've talked about how we're no longer a knowledge economy, especially with AI making everything ubiquitously accessible. We're in a wisdom economy. So being able to return that wisdom into the workforce would be a definite great way for people to give back and have that sense of relevance. So I would love to just talk a little bit about the longevity bonus. That really stuck out with me during your trends. Like we're been gifted an extra 30 years, right, compared to a century ago. Maybe just talk a little bit about the longevity bonus, and then we can do kind of a prompt for people to think about how they're planning to embrace their longevity bonus.
Yeah, so I mean, really, the longevity bonus is our ancestors through technology, healthcare, sanitation, et cetera, has given us literally 25 to 30 extra years. And I think this bonus is a real opportunity for us to rethink that life course, right? So today, for the most part, in the learn, work or earn, retire phase, we tend to jam everything into that middle phase. Like, I mean, if you look at, there's lots of data out there to talk about kind of the U curve of happiness. People tend to hit the bottom of that happiness curve, in their mid 40s. And why is that? Well, you're probably trying to jam a lot of things at the same time. You've got a lot of work pressures. If you're raising children, you've got pressures when it comes to kids. And then you also have, potential caregiving responsibilities with your parents. And so when we think about it, if you've been given an extra 30 years, would it not make sense for you to spread those 30 years out across a longer period of time? Now, again, people will shudder a little bit when I say this, but I think people, moving forward, younger people today may actually have a 50 or 60-year career, which sounds terrible. But if that 50, 60-year career actually has more flexibility in it, where we can pace it in a better way, where we may have breaks, where we can go from part-time to full-time based on what's happening in our lives, that might be a little bit more acceptable, manageable, and actually even, more engaging than trying to pressurize and move everything into this very short period of time between 35 and 55 and think about from a savings perspective. Again, having a bit more time gives you that pressure valve or that release valve for you to be able to do a little bit of that.
We had a client years ago who reinvented himself every 5 years with a new career, and then he took a year off in between that. So he was commercial real estate. Then he took his family and they did an extended bike trip through Tibet and China. Then he came back. He was a mortgage broker, did that for 5 years. Then they took an extended trip through Southeast Asia. Then they came back. So he actually reinvented his career during that year off sabbatical while he and his family immersed in learning about the world. So there's a lot of ways that we can unpack it. We don't have to, like you said, just do that linear life anymore. Simon, I want to get to a couple questions, and thank you all for putting questions into the Q&A box. A question came up about what's being done to measure the quality of longevity versus the quantity of longevity. It makes me think I'm fortunate to be going to Bhutan next month, and they measure gross domestic happiness. How can people measure the quality of longevity? What are some trends that some of these universities you're working with are thinking about?
Yeah, so I mean, the very first one that I think most talk about is this idea of health span and lifespan, right? So we've got longer lives now, so that's lifespan. But it doesn't make a lot of sense, or it's not going to be great if we're just living longer, and our health span, which is the years in which we're living in good health without chronic disease, et cetera, if that doesn't stay tight, then we're really not doing ourselves a service. We're just living longer with lower quality of life. So I think one of the measures will be around how tight can we make that health span, lifespan. I think the most recent data I saw in the U.S. was around 10 to 12 years, right? So most people will live to 80 years old, but that health span is about 10 years below that 70. So we want to make sure that we're going to make sure that we have you're investing in health earlier. I think we all know that we need to invest in health, but I think through the lens of longevity, realizing that you might be living into your 90s or even to 100, those incremental investments in health, those habits, you need to start them early. And I do, a lot of multi-generational work. A couple of the individuals that I work with that are in their mid 70s and quite healthy. And oftentimes they say, if there's one piece of advice I would give myself to my 50-year-old self, which I'm going to be turning 50 next year, is how do I just start incrementally investing in health? This doesn't mean I'm going to be a bodybuilder, but this means how do I make sure that I'm continuing strength, et cetera. So I think that would be the first measure. I think the second measure, to your point, is going to be around happiness and well-being, right? If ultimately at the end of the day, if we're going to live a longer life, how do we measure things like are people satisfied and content, feel a sense of purpose? AKA, are people happy? What are social connections? I think that's going to be a measurement in terms of longevity as well. As the Surgeon General in the U.S. talked about the loneliness crisis. And a lot of loneliness crisis is really at the polarized ends. It's at the older adults and younger adults. And so I think that's going to be a measure as well about quality of longevity, is that if we're living a longer life, but we're feeling lonely along the way, that's going to have an impact on our health, and it's going to obviously have an impact on our overall satisfaction and well-being.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about how retirement was formerly kind of thought as a time of rest and leisure, but you're talking about how this view is changing. So how do you think retirement is being reimagined today? You talked about work a little bit. What are other ways it's being reimagined?
Yeah, I think the big shift is I think people are now thinking about it less as a destination. So I don't know about I think it's the game was in the US as well. So I actually remember playing the game of life, that board game back in the 80s and 90s, right? And when you looked at the board game, that whole board game, the purpose of that was every traveled the same path and you all got to the end, and the end was retirement, and whoever had the most money won. That was the basis of the game. And I can remember that game as a child playing that game, and then, believe it or not, actually created a bit of a mental model for me. So I think we need to shift that mental model, and that's what's happening is people are now bucking against that and saying, you know what, I don't know that I want to retire. Retire by its definition means to retreat. And so I think they're talking about how do we think about this next phase of life when I've reached I like the term financial independence, when I've reached a period of financial independence and now I have more options. What are opportunities for me to re-look at what I want to do in this next chapter of life? And I think that's the big shift. Some of it is work. Some of it is work. I think the most recent stat I've seen is Age Wave, which is Ken Dykewald's organization, who's done a lot of work in longevity. Talks about over 60% of people actually want to work in some way in retirement. Again, some way might be part-time work, it might be volunteer, it could be paid and unpaid, but they want to stay engaged. And I think that's a real shift, is that people aren't wanting, it's not about being young, it's about being useful. People want to stay useful and want to stay engaged in society. And I think that is probably the biggest shift in mindset. And I think as we talked about, is seeing this period of extended midlife, which could be 20 years, as a period of reinvention might be too strong. Some people don't feel like, oh, I'm going to reinvent myself, but a period of growth, a period of trying new things, going back to maybe some hobbies you had when you were a child that you never got to, but it's not about stopping. And I think that's probably the key shift in how people are thinking about this stage of life.
Mm-hmm. We've talked before about following the breadcrumbs of curiosity. I've always thought about taking a ceramics class. Go take the ceramics class. I wanted to kind of play off something you said, which we were talking about prior, which is instead of thinking about it as a time of withdrawal, it's a time of growth and contribution. So retirement before is like, oh, I'm in drawdown mode, but that doesn't have to be drawdown mode in your life. That might be, with your portfolio distribution strategy, but not necessarily with your life living strategy. So do you have any other thoughts around kind of growth and contribution versus withdrawal in a time of retirement?
Yeah, I think one of the things I was really surprised to see was a study around what percentage of our social connections we lose when we leave work, and I think it's over 50%.
Mm.
And so we naturally kind of withdraw unintentionally when we leave work because we leave a massive social network behind. And while, we think of a lot of people at work as friends, oftentimes when you don't have that same relationship of the common thing of going to work and complaining about the boss and talking about how busy you are, you kind of lose those connections, right? And so I think it's really important for people to recognize that social connection is really important. You had Dan Buettner on talking about blue zones, but that having social connections is extremely important in terms of happiness in the next chapter. And so, how do you actually invest in that prior to retirement, but then also diversify your connections? So, diversify might be diversifying different circles, right? And I think that's following that breadcrumb of curiosity, looking to find different groups to interact with because I think they're going to expose you to new things. And we can talk a little bit about experimentation and thinking about how do you explore what's next in a bit. But I think new groups is one. The other one is just intergenerational relationships, right? So my parents are in their 80s. It's probably not a week that goes by where they talk about, oh, my friends my friend, their family passed away or they're getting sick, which is natural at that stage of life. But how do you create friendships of different generations in different ages to kind of, in some ways, protect yourself from the fact that you're concentrated back to diversification on investments? How do you diversify your social network to have people of different stages, different life ages, et cetera? I think that's something for us to consider versus just the drawdown is how do you build back up? What are the things you need to build back up, and what muscles do you need to build back up at this stage of life? Curiosity and exploration, those aren't real muscles that we exercise a lot when you get to closer to retirement. Most of us work in jobs where we have to look at risk management and what can't we do. We have limited resources. So we tend to narrow ourselves in and think about constraints first versus opening up the aperture to think about what's possible. And I think that's another one that I think we should grow into as opposed to retrench.
Yeah, and it takes courage to join a new group where you don't know anyone. But let's tap into the wisdom of the group here. We
Yep.
posted a few minutes ago, how are you planning to embrace your longevity bonus? So let's crowdsource some ideas. What are some ways you want to embrace the longevity bonus? I see in here daily exercise, healthy eating, more creative writing, more community building, and more pickleball, Steph. With intention, looking beyond limiting beliefs, and as I reframe and redefine what it means to successfully age. That's beautiful, Jonathan. Thomas said, enjoying gifting to the next gen while you can see the experience and the outcomes. Don't defer. Yeah, a lot of times people just put it in their estate plan for later, but why not give while you can see the fruits of that being utilized? Being able to travel and van life, Amy, focusing on health, part-time work, travel, and at least no one listed shuffleboard. See, we're already reimagining retirement. I love that, Kevin. But being able to spend time with family now while we can. I mean, these are all really wonderful ideas. Coaching younger managers and helping them with their career. So mentoring, absolutely. That's a great way to invest our time in our longevity bonus. So thank you for continuing to have those ideas coming in. I want to make sure we hit a lot of these ideas, Simon. So let's get to some of the work you're doing at Yale with their School of Management and talk about the Next L Collaborative. Can you tell us a little bit more what these midlife transition programs are really trying to accomplish and who are they serving?
Yeah. We talked about structures, right? About the fact that, we don't necessarily have structures for this stage of life. And again, it made sense. We didn't live long enough that we needed these structures. And so one of the areas that I'm really focused on is how to build structures in higher education. And it's not, yes, it's sure it's Yale, it's Stanford, it's Harvard that are offering these programs, but I think it's really important for us to realize these are the programs that actually can be offered across universities, state universities, community college, et cetera. But using universities as a place where people can go back to and return to make a transition. And so if you think about it, my son's 19 turning 20, he's at second year university. What is he going to school for? Well, he's going to school to learn a few things, meet some new people, and try a bunch of different careers so he can figure out what's next. And that's very similar to what's happening when people are reaching this period of midlife, is that they're looking to continue to learn, maybe try something new. They want to meet new people who are at the same stage that can help them navigate this transition, and they want to try a few things. So a couple of the universities, kind of the more elite universities, started this trend about 8 to 10 years ago. Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute is called DCI for short. Harvard ALI, Advanced Leadership Initiative, were two of the ones that started these midlife transition programs. And really they're targeted at accomplished individuals who are looking to transition to what's next. They know they don't really want to retire in the same way, but they want to be able to take time and explore new avenues, and they want to actually create a new network of people that are not like them, but at the same stage. And so there's these midlife transition programs that have emerged at these schools. Many of them right now are 1 year residential programs, but more and more of them are actually emerging that have different formats. So the Next Cell Collaborative, which you mentioned, Seth, is actually a collaborative of about 25 plus universities that are actually looking at how do we share best practices, how do we create more of these types of programs across universities globally, and democratize this idea of using the university as a place to transition. And so I've had the opportunity to join the Yale School of Management Experienced Leaders Initiative, which is their midlife transition program. It's launching in January. Chip Connolly is a advisory board member, Mark Friedman, those in the longevity space. And we're designing a program that's 6 months long, hybrid, where you're able to, with 15, 20 other people, go through this transition where there's three pillars. It's called inward, outward, and forward. So you spend some time reflecting inward, taking a sense of what values you have right now, what are some of your strengths, learning from others, what are you thinking about, what's a priority at this stage of life. Outward is, again, back to your curiosity piece, exploring, thinking about different ways you want to contribute, different topics you're interested in. And then forward is building an actual plan to help you experiment, try different avenues, and move forward. And so I think these types of structures are structures that I think will emerge over time. Seth, I know that you're in Austin, Texas. The University of Texas, Austin has a program called the UT Fellows Program, which is exactly the same thing. And I was talking to their executive director a couple of weeks ago, and they have really interesting programming to help people at this stage of life utilize the campus, essentially, faculty, clubs, alumni, et cetera, to explore and to figure out what's next. And I think this is a model that you're going to see grow across university and college campuses in the US and beyond.
Yeah, I think it's great. And it's probably good business for them as well. It's hitting a whole new demographic of folks in midlife who are needing to reimagine. So who says that higher education needs to stop in our mid-20s, right? It makes sense that as people go through life transitions, that they have these resources and can have a cohort group and trusted academic institutions to support them on that journey of reimagining their next chapter ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's really, sorry, just to interrupt, I think it's really important also to note that it's actually good for the traditional age students as well, right? So while we think about, sure, there's mentorship opportunities for the traditional age student, that's great. There's also opportunities for the older adults to learn from the traditional age students around new technologies, around the way the world's working today, get a different perspective. And when we talk about curiosity, well, that's a group that's really curious.
Yeah.
And so I think the mixture of older and younger, the more of that I think is needed as people think about, how do they explore what's next.
And the intergenerational learning can go the other way. The wisdom from the older generations, the curiosity from the younger. Yeah, it's a win-win for sure.
Absolutely.
I wanted to just introduce a tool and put it into the chat. We'll also put it into the email afterwards, which is an assessment that we've created that allows you to do a series of simple questions to kind of see a spider chart of where you currently rank yourself, subjective test, across these 12 dimensions of wealth. So I invite you to do that on your spare time. It'll give you a really cool report, and it'll give you some very helpful to-dos and resources to consider how you might expand those dimensions of your life that you're wanting to expand as you move forward into the next chapter. So take a look at that assessment that we'll give you. And I want to jump into the 5 retirement reframes. So you've talked about this before, how it helps really individuals thrive in the next chapter. Could you just walk us through briefly those 5 reframes?
Sure. Yeah, so these reframes, how they came about is, over the past few years, we've done a lot of workshops with people who are thinking about retirement and people who are retired. And once we kind of layer on longevity and what's happening in longevity, and they see through the longevity lens, they look at it, retirement through that longevity lens, they tend to have five kind of reframes in how they think about it. So the first one is this idea of a longevity bonus or dividend. They start thinking about, wait a second, I have these extra 30 years. How do I optimize these? And how do I redeploy this throughout my life? And how do I think about this in different stages? So that's the first one. They also, in the first one, the longevity bonus, a lot of people just don't realize how much time they have left, right? Someone who's 65, life expectancy in the US is 79, 80, but someone who actually reaches the age of 65, their life expectancy is into the high 80s, right? So again, people don't realize how much time they have. So that's the first one. The second one we've talked about, which speaks to your tool, which I love, which is there's more to retirement planning than just money. Well, you need to have enough money. It's a foundation. There's no question about that. Financial security leads to all those things. That's, the core of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, that and health. But there's more to successful retirement planning than that. There's the social connection, purpose in meaning, the mindset of things. And if you actually talk to retirees, people who are a few years out, for the most part, they're actually not talking a lot about money. They're talking about those other things. And if you ask them what advice would they give to pre-retirees, often the advice is around those non-financial aspects. So that's the second thing, is holistic planning is important. You need to be intentional about thinking about what you're going to do, which leads me into the third one. The third one is around this idea of time affluence. Most of us work, I don't know, anywhere between 35 to 45, maybe even 50, 60 hours a week. And that's a lot of time to replace in retirement. And so I oftentimes, when we talk to different individuals or crowds around retirement, and we ask them what they're going to do, it tends to be very surface. It tends to be, I'm going to travel, I'm going to golf, I'm going to hang out with the grandkids, which are all really good things. They don't actually sit down and think about how much time 35, 40 hours a week is that they need to replace. So you hear people say, well, I used to go to Costco on Sunday. Now I go to Costco on Wednesday. And one stat that's kind of alarming to me in the US is that, people spend 40 to 45 hours a week in retirement watching TV and Netflix. So again, I got nothing against TV or Netflix. I love my Netflix time, but that's a lot of hours. And just to put that in perspective, I wrote this down. Game of Thrones, the entire series was 74 hours. Friends was 88 hours. So, people say they're going to watch Netflix, but you're going to burn through shows pretty quickly, right? So time affluence is the third thing. They need to reframe how to intentionally plan their time and ideally relate it to those holistic retirement aspects. I'm going to, fill my time with purpose and meaning and connection. The fourth one is the idea of mindset. So the idea of having a positive view of aging. Becca Levy, who's a professor at Yale School, at Yale, wrote a book called Cracking the Age Code. And it talked about people who have a positive self-view of aging actually live 7.5 years longer. And that makes sense. If you think about the fact that you realize I've got a lot of time, it's not, yes, physically I might be declining, but there's so many things that get better with age, which we listed in the chat. When people lean into that, well, they naturally take care of their body. They tend to have purpose, make friends. They tend to try new things, and those all contribute to aging. And the last one is around, again, a mindset piece, which is around the idea of curiosity and a growth mindset, so that it's the fact that we're not fixed in what we are today. Carol Dweck does research on this around fixed versus growth mindset. But the idea is that even at 65, we have lots of time to grow. We can try those things. We can get back to, some of the things we loved when we were a kid. I think it was for you, it's a ukulele is one of the things that you enjoyed when you were a child. But how do you get back to those things? Because you actually do have time. And so I think really it's about the fifth reframe is, how do we experiment forward? How do we make sure that we move forward with some of those things? So those are kind of the five general reframes where people, when they start looking through the lens of longevity, they rethink how they approach retirement.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And what we're going to do now is just launch a poll that will help you think about these five retirement reframes. And the question is, which of these resonates the most with you right now? So you have to just pick one. So of these five retirement reframes, longevity bonus, the holistic planning, time affluence, positive view of aging, curiosity and learning, Which to you resonates the most? So let's go ahead and see what we got here on the answers for which of the 5 retirement reframes resonate the most. Well, what are the answers here? So it looks like curiosity and learning has the highest percentage. 41% went there. And then the other 4 are pretty even between longevity, holistic planning, time affluence, and positive view of aging. So this is on cue, Simon. Let's
Yeah,
get into,
we didn't plant this.
yeah, curiosity and experimentation. Let's tell us a little bit more about what experimentation means in this context.
Yeah, so I think it's really getting back to a bit of a beginner's mindset, right? And so when you think about a period of time where you really don't know what the path is forward, and that's oftentimes the case of retirement. I hear a lot of people say, I know what I'm retiring from, right? I don't like the commute. I don't like the hours. I don't like the boss. I don't like the stress. But what are you retiring to? Right? And a lot of times people don't have a very well articulated viewpoint. And so, which is why they end up kind of in inertia into kind of what they did before, which was, Costco on Wednesdays, maybe a little bit more TV. And so we get, it's really important for people to think back to an explorer or an experimentation mindset. So a lot of people don't want to start things because they feel like they're going to be locked into those things. So oftentimes you hear people say, well, let's start a bucket list, like list all the things that you want to be able to do in retirement. And while a bucket list is, one way to think about it, I prefer to think of it more as a curiosity list or a curious list, right? A bucket list has a connotation of if I do it, like if I put on my list, I have to do it, right? I got to check it off before I hit, kick the bucket. And a curious list is much more about what are the things I'm curious about? What are the things that I'm just interested in exploring? And it dials back the pressure of A, having to do it, or B, having it be successful. Because when we get to later in life, we still have this pressure of like there's a right or wrong answer. And I think this idea of experimenting is really important in terms of trying new things. So practical ways to experiment. One is through conversations, right? If you're interested in trying something new, maybe it's teaching at the college, volunteering, working part-time, etc. Have conversations with people who are already doing it, right? And learn about what their journey was, learn about what they like, learn about what they don't like. The second thing is, how do you actually truly experiment with it? Can you try it on for size? So instead of jumping in and taking on a full course load at the college, can you try a night class? Could you guest teach a couple of night classes? So how do you try to experiment with the things that you're interested in? And I think that's a very challenging thing for people to think about at this stage, and actually it takes a bit of intentional planning because it pushes you out of your comfort zone. Because a lot of people, they don't want to try things because they don't want to quote unquote fail at them. And if they try it, they feel like they have to be successful. If they don't like it, that, oh my, I wasted my time. Well, you got nothing but time. And today, if you've got financial independence and freedom, the stakes are actually quite low. So how do you try low stakes experiments?
Yeah, I love that. And to give yourself time for experimentation. I had the opportunity to listen to James Clear last night, who wrote Atomic Habits, and I just put in the post, he said, determine your highest and best use, and then look at your weekly calendar and eliminate the tasks that are not aligned on that path. So if you think about if you want exploration, if you want to focus on health, if you want to focus on family or new experiences, what in your current calendar is pulling away your opportunity to do more of that experimentation in your life? So I just kind of thought I'd share that.
No, I think it's important, and I think that experimentation phase, if for those who are not who are approaching retirement, I think experimenting now before you get there is ideal. Now, often the objection that I get is that I don't have enough time to do that, which is absolutely fair. But again, if you think that when you arrive at retirement that everything's going to get solved, that everything's going to be good, you want to think about whether it makes sense for you want to try it then, or do you actually want to try some of these things now so you actually can glide into it as opposed to this hard stop. Because while the early stages of retirement often for people are very liberating, they get to travel, they get the time off, etc., it can be very disorienting. And I think the more things you can do to smooth out that period of liberation and disorientation, the better. And also, if you think about it, if you have, say, 10 to 15 years of healthy, living in that next chapter, if you spend 3 to 4 years still in that disorientation phase, that percentage, 3 or 4 years as a percentage of 15 to 20 is actually quite large. So again, things that you can do as you lead up to it to kind of glide into that, I would be things that I would suggest you get trying and you get going because it does take time. You can't all of a sudden retire and just make friends. That's not really how it works.
Right. It's not just what you're leaving, it's what you're going to. And how can you build a bridge of kind of experimental activities and relationships to help you transition, make that transition smoother?
Yeah,
Would
absolutely.
love to have people answer the chat. Some people already have, but just again to crowdsource, what is one experiment or one new activity that you would like to try as part of your next chapter? So when you do have a little bit of this bonus time, what's one new activity that you maybe haven't done or haven't done in a while that you would like to be able to explore? So I have take a woodworking course in college, explore creative writing. I love that. Learning about becoming a death doula, and that will be something that will be needed for sure. Being able to do some serious woodworking. No
Mhm.
longer the lackadaisical woodworking, Kevin, the serious woodworking. Making some pottery, learning to quilt, learning about sea turtles. I
Love
love that.
that.
Learning about sea turtles, joining a women's golf league, learn another language, work on public speaking, tutoring at a local high school, exploring health coaching, maybe living in Europe like you'd always dreamed of, and then traveling from there, learning Spanish, taking a master gardening class. I love these. These are great experimentations, and it's exciting to think about if you're still in the working phase of your life, could you go do a weekend gardening class or a weekend woodworking program? How can you start to dip your toe in that direction? But these are wonderful ideas and keep them going so that you can keep inspiring each other. Learning more about gardening, soil composition, and taking care of our living world and increasing more plant life in the world. Huge. Thank you, Kristen, for sharing that. Coaching and mentoring. These are wonderful. Well, we
And
have, yeah.
as part of this journey, one of the things I'd encourage you to do is as you're trying these things, right, meet new people, right? Get out of your comfort zone. Seth and I talked a little bit about the value of prior to the call about the value of weak ties, people that are not in your network. Oftentimes, when we think about exploring, we think about the people in our own network. I talk to our family members, talk to our friends, and the reality is they're probably very similar to you, and also they probably see you in a certain light. So maybe if I said I'm going to go explore sea turtles, my son or my wife might be like, sea turtles, like, are you, like, what does that have to do with what you're wanting to do? But talking to people who are actually in the sea turtle world may be a way for me to meet more people that are exploring, marine life, et cetera. And that actually allows me to meet new people, explore new topics, et cetera. And so it's important to have a balance of people who are close to you. But I really encourage you to spend some time with people who have no investment or no stake in who you are, but are there to help and are at the same stage and are wanting to be a partner to explore a new topic.
Yeah, when I took a ceramic class a year ago, it was so fun to meet a cast of characters I would have never met, and I really gained a new appreciation for them and for their uniqueness and creativity. So here's a poll question. Reimagining retirement, what excites you the most about the idea of living longer and reimagining retirement? Pick one of the following: new learning opportunities, more time for hobbies, giving back, volunteering, part-time work that feels aligned, and strengthening new and existing relationships.
And I love a lot of these options, and I'd encourage you to think about them through the lens of longevity, which means you probably have a lot of time to be able to learn new things, give back, et cetera, right? So I think that again, look through that lens of time and ability to try new things.
Mm-hmm. Looks like it's relationships and new learning opportunities and hobbies. Those are all kind of the top three. So yeah, it's the people in our life, diversifying those relationships and learning and hobbies. These are all wonderful. Would love to just remind everyone that we're going to be able to give you a recording summary for today, as well as a top 10 takeaways that Simon was kind enough to create for us. We will put that in the email. I think we'll also post it in the chat as well. If there are any final questions, we have just a couple minutes left. Happy to take those. It looks like there's a financial planning question. Simon, do you see portfolio goals and allocation changing with longevity increasing? So kind of from a financial planning standpoint, are you seeing shifts there?
Yeah, I think it's very early days, but I do think that there's going to be a bit of a shift in terms of how we think about decumulation, right? Oftentimes, right now, what we do is we think about, accumulating to a peak of assets and then decumulating. I think you're going to see more planning involved that has, part-time income, where you have actually, some steady income, so you're not drawing as much. So I think the goals will change, and then your portfolio allocation will change. The second thing is if you're going to live until you're 90 to 100, I think the portfolio allocation of just very conservative investments needs to be rethought, right? Because again, your investment horizon may be quite a bit longer than you anticipate. So again, having a good asset allocation mix that works with your risk tolerance, but takes into consideration that you might have, a number of years, 20 to 30 years left in retirement and not 5, is probably another shift in how we think about planning.
Yeah, this is wonderful, Simon. Thank you so much for sharing with us and for the important work that you're doing for these different universities to try to create systemic change that will really support this journey of reimagining what has been kind of a linear, archaic definition of retirement. I feel excited. I hope everyone here feels excited by the ideas that were shared from the group.